First of all, at CPI, we think that journalism can trigger social change, and we ask everyone in our team to not let anyone tell us otherwise. Uh, don't You cannot let the skeptical and cynical people convince you that you cannot find hope for change in journalism, because you can. But trust can only be gained by independent, bulletproof, and consistent media that is ingrained and invested in community it serves. Journalism is vital to democracy, and in this historic moment for the world, it has always been, but maybe it is in these times of data overload and misinformation when good journalism strives and shines. It filters what's relevant, it explains, it shows, it compares, it analyzes. And maybe in Puerto Rico, where we have a democratic deficit that has shown its face more bluntly in the past few years, journalism truly makes a difference. Puerto Rico is a battleground full of challenges, as you may know, and they range from colonialism and social experimentation to barbaric disaster capitalism. This shows basically in the profound poverty and inequality that our people face. The US Census says that 44.9% of the people who live in Puerto Rico are below the poverty line, a number that is significantly higher than the US national average of 13.4%. The Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights for the United Nations, Philip Alston, said after a recent visit to Puerto Rico that, I quote, the link between poverty and the absence of political rights is perfectly illustrated by Puerto Rico. If it were a state, it would be the poorest of the Union, but it is not a state. It is a mere territory. In this context, our Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, which is a nonprofit founded by journalists Omaya Sosa Pascual and Oscar Serrano 12 years ago, has been working steadily for a long time, most times under the radar. We have been building credibility, establishing bonds of trust with people, with communities, with sources, and also training our journalists so they become a group of professionals who work with award-winning and international investigative journalism teams. Under the leadership of our first executive director, the tenacity of our founders, and our board of directors, and a team with a deep commitment to their profession, um, we were able to find our place in the media landscape among Puerto Rican readers. At the same time, our body of work was built. CPI has been constantly growing sustainably. During the first 5 years, all work was essentially done by contract, pro bono, and by freelance journalists. But we moved to find financial support in the US, in Puerto Rico, and that allowed us to start formalizing employment for our journalists and a small administrative team. We are just a few still, but we do a lot like many nonprofits do. I started as a freelance journalist at the center, then as an editor, and finally as the executive director when founding director decided to retire. My approach to the organization has been to structure and formalize three program areas: investigative reporting, freedom of information litigation, and training to journalists. All three areas are intertwined and work collaboratively, not always like an orchestra, but more like a salsa band. We have established important link with universities that offer specific training on specialized issues or skills, and or that send us interns or invite us to events where we can present and sometimes mentor young journalists. We have collaborated with media outlets such as Quartz, the Miami Herald, Associated Press, New York Magazine, CNN, USA Today. Last year, for the first time, we went on a tour visiting different Puerto Rican diasporas in the US, listening and learning about how they see our work, what issues affect them, and starting a conversation about how we can be relevant to them. We visited North Carolina, Connecticut, New York, Chicago, California, and after all, there are more Puerto Ricans in the US right now than on the island, and we do need to listen to their needs too. Trying to do so, we have made investigations in these past few years, such as after the hurricane, when we reported on how displaced people were being treated when seeking shelter in New York City, or when we captured the strong and underreported story of the Puerto Rican community in Chicago, while investigating and trying to make sense of how it has changed since Maria. Also, we have kept an eye on core issues for our country, the reconstruction and the recovery after Maria, and also government corruption. And in the administration of now former Governor Ricardo Rosselló, and more recently, as we didn't, as if we didn't have our hands full, the earthquakes starting this year and then COVID. When we realized there was no model for a climate disaster, uh, for climate disaster recovery journalism, the Los Chavos de Maria project was born as a follow the money investigate and as a follow the money ongoing investigation. We examined the experiences of Sandy and Katrina. We saw that there was, beyond coverage within the daily media, an independent recovery fund control model dedicated to explaining the process, analyzing the data, and investigating how these funds were being used. So we created Los Chavos de Maria. Dozens of reports have had resonance and results since then. For example, a couple of months ago, we managed to extend the period for the transsexual community and other groups to request assistance, individual assistance from FEMA. Also, we managed to, for the Controller's Office in Puerto Rico, to introduce a coding for the recovery contracts, so we can be able to follow them, not only us, but also everyone and every other journalist. These are small victories, anyone would say, but at the same time, they are changes that mean a lot to a lot of people. Above all, on the webpage of Los Chavos de Maria, you will find stories of people who are supposed to be experiencing a recovery process that has yet to arrive. Finally, the Telegram chat, a story that achieved significant changes, not only political, but more cultural. Never before it have been in the lips of all people in family conversations, in jobs, in the media, and among youngsters, a strong rejection to corruption. When we got the chat and did the report that was published that morning at 2 a.m., our message was clear. It was, it was not just a problem of character, of people calling names or insulting, or insensitive officials. There were illegalities, political campaign work done with public resources, sharing of confidential information that could benefit friends and private clients, and in the end, abuse of power. We supported the chat publication 4 days later with a report that categorically documented the widespread corruption in the Rosselló administration. And we already know the outcome. But the job is far from done. Puerto Rico still awaits for these people to be held accountable. The results of investigations being conducted both by local and federal authorities are still pending, although 14 members of Rosselló administration and close friends, according to the local media, were pointed by the local Department of Justice of illicit enrichment, unjustified enrichment, and offering bribes. There is a sense of impunity among Puerto Rico citizens, and we at the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo will continue to report on them. Besides government corruption, Puerto Rico has faced and will continue to face monumental changes. In 2016, a fiscal control board was undemocratically imposed by the US federal government. It continues to dictate the island's political fiscal policy, imposing budget, long-term financial plans, leading debt negotiations, vetoing locally approved laws. Its decisions have directly affected and continue to affect the most vulnerable sectors in Puerto Rico. We at the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo will continue to report on them and fight them in court when they try to hide their decision-making processes and operations behind the veil of immunity and secrecy. We have already taken them to court and will continue to do so. There is also the slow bureaucratic recovery process since Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Millions and millions of dollars in disaster recovery money seem to be flowing through the bureaucracy of local and federal government, as well as the private sector, but not to the people. Almost 90% of the money had been going to the pockets of the US companies, not Puerto Rican companies. Puerto Rico people needs each and every single cent of this money. And we at Centro de Periodismo will continue to keep track of this complex yet critical process with reporting projects such as Los Chavos de Maria. 2020 election year is, in front of us in Puerto Rico. It will not be business as usual, not only here, also in the US. As we speak, we are doing final edits to important investigation about the campaigns, the political campaigns behind closed doors happening here. And there is the seemingly a never-ending issue of the island's political status, an issue that goes across each one of our stories. Puerto Rico is a colony, an issue, and almost a quarter into the 21st century, it continues to hang in a limbo that affects each and every one of Puerto Ricans, regardless of their political views. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you for this award. We are humbled. We get it in the name of our community and readers to their long-standing tradition of resistance. And this award also goes, of course, to our team of journalists here in Puerto Rico, whose outstanding job and engaging work make us proud every day. Thank you.